Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Lev and Noah, for the invitation to come. I'm Benjamin Bratton, and as Lev mentioned a little bit in his introduction, I teach at SciArc in Los Angeles, Experimental Architecture School. I've taught for a while. I lecturer in the Department of Design Media Arts at UCLA. And I run a group at Yahoo called the Advanced Strategies Group, and where we do sort of next-gen product development there. So I'm a bit of a occupational mashup in my own sort of regard. Instead of sort of talking about what I imagine a software studies might be, which is something Lev and I have spent a lot of time talking about, I'd like to make some initial claims for a software studies with the presumption that it already exists. And one of the sort of claims are based on how a software studies might ask us to look at things that are not software. That is, how software might operate itself as an epistemology as rather than as an object structure, as a structure of objects in the world to be described. So quickly, let me sort of go through this. First of all, I'm interested in developing what we might call an interface ontology, an ontological system of claims about the structure of, particularly the interrelationships of the social and material world, that looks at interfaces less as a kind of secondary or transitive point of connection between things, but in fact the first order of business that we might describe. Less as that would include software interfaces, architectural interfaces, computational interfaces. Next, we're looking at transitive conductive membranes before fixed forms, flow and interruption before stasis. Second, I want to sort of make sort of the claim, I don't mean to sort of offend any Marxists in the audience, but that computation, in fact, I think the argument to me that computation is in fact we understood as a sort of primary base level understanding of the processes of globalization, capitalism and globalization as superstructural epiphenomenal effects of planetary computation in its own right. And towards the software studies, I think we're within this. We see ourselves that I want to make the claim we're already living inside a software envelope for the most part. The software in the gas pump, the software from which we buy our gas, software in the carburetor that runs the car, software in the traffic lights that make sure we don't bump into things. The software envelope already describes us to a large extent. So what I would sort of describe is really sort of how these three things might come together. So again, I'm a sociologist really by training, so I want to sort of make the claim within this argument, within what a software studies may teach to sociology in general. Within sociology, based on sort of work of Bruno Latour, John Urey, and others, the figure of the social itself is vanishing and disappearing. And in some ways, this goes back to a rethinking of the originary moments within European sociology, where the conflicts between Gabriel Tarde and Emile Durkheim in understanding the social as a kind of metaphysical, organic, contiguous whole, the Durkheimian model, roughly traceable to the nation-state's geography, and Gabriel Tarde's models of the social as a series of emergent networks that organizes both humans and non-humans within their emergent networks. And in ways not surprisingly, our friend Bruno Latour is sort of come out recently as a big Tarde fan. Okay, so all design is interface design. What do we mean? An interface is not only buttons with words on them, is any boundary or point of contact between two complex systems, which itself governs the condition of exchange between those systems. And increasingly argue in a network society, the interfaces between things matter as much as the things themselves. The word interface is itself a product of modernity, first appearing in 1882, quite late, and referring then to a surface forming a common boundary. It's only until 1964, according to OED, that the term would refer to connections between pieces of scientific and technological equipment, and then in this between humans and that equipment. Computation, however, has made everything more interconnected, and therefore the old fixed-in-place boundaries between one location and another seem to matter less, or at least matter differently than they did before. Interfaces between things generate and give form to the things that they connect. Instead of given things being merely connected by interfaces, now the intensity of connections between interfaces generates the things themselves. And in this we understand the link between theories of post-social and the convergence of a planetary computation. The shifts towards mobile social forms then both drive and are driven by the acceleration in computational power and communicative flexibility of the interface points that structure the landscape. The greater the mobility within the network, the greater the need for more sophistication of its interfaces. The greater the ability of cheap, powerful, intelligent computation, the greater the enabling of flexible mobilization. This is our contemporary dialectic. And there is, in other words, a Moore's law of interfaces. Architectural interfaces, urban interfaces, physical interfaces. And therefore, I argue that as these things become more, as the network becomes more intense within the zone, there becomes more a need for maps of its programs to give a kind of reflexive visuality to what's in fact happening. Okay, our contemporary use of the term is colored by, of course, by proliferation of graphical user interfaces, images that serve as diagrammatic tools with which from which we choose among an array of given choices to navigate or execute our desires. But the interface per se is many things. Architecture is an interface to space and people. Steering wheels are interfaces to cars. Cars are interfaces to cities, and cities are interfaces to people and capital. This is, of course, Minard's carte figurative of Napoleon's campaign into Russia. And I make the argument that we have to understand the history of the graphical user interface, first and foremost in terms of the history of the diagram. Now diagrams proliferate, but in a different sort of way, but a kind of a becoming interface has organized the diagram for us, where instead of merely appearing as maps of events that are occurring, those maps now become instrumental mechanisms by which the chain of representation works all the way down the other direction, and we can control that which is mapped. A quick typology of interfaces is then helpful. Let's consider first by scale. Most GUIs are designed to be used by one person at a time, a singular agent we call a user. Interfaces for many things, the user uses interfaces for many things, and perhaps the world appears to him more and more as a landscape of buttons and words disclosing choices. There are interfaces for groups of people. Oh, you're kidding. Okay. How much time do I got left? That's it? No, really? Okay, let me show you the pictures then. Can I show you the pictures? I got good pictures. Okay. Okay. Interfaces for groups of people. Interfaces that organize groups of people, massive structures of interfaces. Interfaces that order continental scale structures of the city. So, three kinds of interface design. There's the design of the conditions of assemblage, there's the design of images of assemblage, and there's the design of image instruments of assemblage. Another sort of general typology of interfaces. Again, this would work for architectural or software or anything. There are mobile or immobile interfaces, static or dynamic, synchronous or asynchronous, symmetrical or asymmetrical, iconic or indexical, singular, plural, activated, unactivated, territorializing, deterritorializing, etc. Constance New Babylon, it's project based on sort of the city itself as an unfolding playground configuration of interfaces of all sorts. The border between Mexico and the United States is an interface for reasons that I can't go into today, but because of time, but you understand the gist of this. Now, we also sort of see that the notion of the sort of McLuhan-esque inheritance of the interface as an extension of an anthropocentric center gives way to a world in which we become the extensional, a kind of inverse prosthesis where the world acts upon interfaces onto us. The design of a configuration of interfaces of whatever sorts, interfaces, we simply call program, with an architectural notions of program. Interfaces are the images by which where we sort of move from what we might call a mode of production to what Jacques Rancière calls a distribution of the sensible, where that which shows up in the interface is that which can organize social work. This is of course, the sort of Firefox plugin that gives you a sense of the carbon footprint of your flight. And in this is sort of, in this as well. We move from mode of production distribution of the distribution of the sensible, and in this sense, the interface, and more importantly, the image of the interface becomes the possibility by which the program of planetary computation becomes social infrastructure. Thank you.